Well, joining us in the studio is TalkTV's chief political commentator, Peter Cardwell, and former Metropolitan Police Detective, Peter Bleksley. Peter, I'm going to start with you. Cardwell, that is. I suddenly realised that.
I was going to say, which way are you going here?
This one. I mean, listening to that, to me, it was sort of very wishy-washy. There were a lot of sort of vague headlines. We're going to do all sorts of things. We're going to sort of do this in the realm of education. We're going to be tougher on law and order. We're going to help people renting houses. But not much granular detail. Is that normal, do you think, for
It is fairly
King's
normal.
speech?
There are a lot of words in this one. It's the longest since 2015. But in terms of the number of bills, about 21. Now, the question is whether the government actually gets through those before the election. There's a lot to happen between now and then, including an autumn statement and a spring budget. So there's a lot to go. Also, is it in May or is it in October in terms of the election? In terms of what they want to do, yes, certainly big focus on law and order. There's a lot within that, I think. But these were just the headlines from King Charles today. It was never going to go into a huge amount of detail. There'll be a big debate in Parliament over the next couple of days as well. And then we'll get into the nitty-gritty of these bills being presented and we'll see where they go. But interesting today, lots in it, but a few things not in it as well. LGBT conversion therapy, for example, that ban is not in there. Also, legislation which would allow central government to ban local government councils from putting in low traffic neighbourhoods. That's nowhere to be seen either. So it's interesting what's there and also what's not there.
Would you see it as a sort of political statement? Because this is the King's speech that effectively will sort of usher Rishi towards the next election. So what is he trying to say with this King's speech? Who is he trying to appeal to? Because as Alex said, it seems rather sort of nebulous and wishy-washy.
I mean, Rishi Sunak keeps talking about the longer-term interests of the country, that he's making tough decisions, whether it's on
What's he care about the long term? He won't be there.
Well, he wants people to think he will, though, I suppose, is part of it. But
good luck with that, Rishi.
But criminal justice, for example, it's a very interesting one because the Conservatives know they can kind of win on that, although Labour have been doing better in the polls recently.
Yeah, Peter.
Which Peter?
Bleksley.
Which Peter?
On that, there was a huge focus on law and order. I don't know if this is necessarily in response to some of the sort of more horrible news we've had recently. Part of that is making sure that offenders turn up for their sentencing. Of course, the murderer of Zara Alina did not do that. Lucy Letby did not do that. Also talking about far tougher sentences and saying that those who commit the most heinous acts, particularly sex crimes that have been premeditated, are going to be there for life. But my concern is we've got the highest prison population since 2011, about 500 prison spaces left. And it seems to me what's been happening is completely the opposite direction of that. People being released early to free up space in prisons.
Yes, although Alex Chalk MP, the Lord Chancellor, was on the television this morning saying we've got a plan which is going to break all records in terms of building new prison spaces.
They said that in 2019 as well.
Right.
Indeed, they did. So we will have to see. I think your scepticism is very well placed, and it's fine locking people up, but you've got to have cells into which to put them. And talking of cells, taking people out of cells to put them in front of courts to hear their sentencing, if the judge decrees it necessary, they've said that reasonable force will be allowed. So we can say reasonable or proportionate. Well, I've got my crystal ball out and I've got some very bad news coming down the line, because if this gets onto the statute book and some of the worst, most sadistic murderers are forced from their cells into the court to hear their sentencing, I'm afraid we can guarantee that one of them will sue the authorities for injuries caused whilst forcing them into the court, and we'll have to see how that kind of court case will pan out, unfortunately.
No, I'd like to suggest that whoever does that, whoever sues the government because they got injured, because they wouldn't face their sentences, to say, oh, look, here's your lawsuit. Yeah, now sit down and do your sentence. Now,
also, if they do turn up to the court case about the previous court case, will they turn up for the verdict?
Exactly right, exactly
keep going.
right. I haven't got a running order for the rest of the show. Just because of that,
well done, Kevin.
that dramatic theatrical gesture, I will now be rendered impotent for the rest of the show. But seriously, Peter Bleksley, the full life sentences that they're talking about, expanding the number of offences that will warrant being put into a cell and them throwing away the key for the rest of your life. They're expanding that number. I mean, I mean, I'm not against that. I think there should be more. If you're going to have full life sentences, some of the people who don't get full life sentences, I think, well, you know, if that doesn't get a full life sentence, what the hell does? And I think we ought to think about full life sentences for crimes that aren't just murder. There should be other crimes that warrant those sentences at all. But in the great scheme of things, Peter, in the criminal echelons. I mean, would it make any difference? I mean, will we get less murders if there are more full life sentences in the air?
No, I don't think we will, but I think it gives the public some sense of satisfaction. By the same token, that if we brought back hanging, you wouldn't get less murders. It's been shown time and time again in many different jurisdictions that capital punishment is not a deterrent for those who want to kill others. But it's very interesting that this proposal in the King's Speech comes today, just in a matter of days after Zana Alina's murderer, Jordan McSweeney, had his sentence reduced from 38 years to 33 years as the minimum time he'll serve, which is absolutely appalling, and so many people have been rightfully outraged by that.
And that's the point, because that's a real indication of the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. So the government's thinking, we've got to get tougher, there's got to be more of these full life sentences. Meanwhile, the authorities are busy being lenient with a monster like Jordan McSweeney, not getting the memo.
Yeah, absolutely. And it perfectly fitted that sadistic element that Alex Chalk was talking about.
Yes.
And that's going to change in the legislation.
Come in this legislation. He could not have been more sadistic.
If there's a sadistic or sexual element to murder, that will perhaps lead to a whole life tariff. The interesting thing, actually, is that there are about 80,000 people in prison in this country. Only 67 of them currently have whole life tariffs. Right. So this could change things quite a lot in terms of what prison it does, what's it for, and crucially, how much it costs to lock people up for 50, 60 years.
Yeah, I mean, Cardi, picking up on something that you said earlier, that the focus in, it seems to be Sunak's mantra at the moment, which is long-term decisions. And he's talking about these in the shape of building the NHS workforce, investment into towns and cities, whether it be about tougher sentences, climate change, hitting targets, North Sea oil. But how many of these are likely to make in the rest of the tenure that we know he's got? Or how many would just be reversed with a change in government?
Well, not a huge number, and it's interesting as well. There could hypothetically be another King's Speech before the next election. In theory, Parliament can go on until January 2025. I don't think it will, but there could be another King's Speech. But the thought of getting through 21 pieces of legislation at least is an awful lot within that time period, especially when you have all these other big set-piece events and recesses and all the rest of it. So it's very ambitious, I think. I mean, we're saying it's not that inspiring. A lot of this has been pre-announced and so on, but there is quite a lot to get through. And actually, Rishi Sunak's parliamentary procedure and timings have been criticised on numerous occasions for not having kind of enough for MPs to do enough legislation. But there are things, as Peter mentions there as well, in terms of legislation that actually exists at the moment. You can be done for contempt of court if you don't come up, for example, to hear your sentence being read out. But codifying that into another law, some people say actually another law isn't needed, just implement the law that's there already. And that is the case. I mean, certainly in the Zara Alina case as well, there are various arguments around that. So it'll be really interesting to see how this goes. Certainly on the criminal justice element, there's a lot of Labour basically agreeing with the government on a lot of that. So if Rishi Sunak wants to put clear blue water electorally, that'll be quite difficult.
Would you think he's picked some of these for that reason, that they can be done, so he can tick them off and list them then at the dispatch box and say these are the things the government has managed to achieve?
Yes, I think he can, especially because his 5 pledges, which we'll evaluate on the 4th of January, are all going sort of all right-ish, but not really. Yeah, I mean, we're going to stop the boats while we've got rid of a fifth of them, for example.
Halve inflation.
So, so we'll see what happens with those, and then I think it's into tricky territory. The big gamble politically is that the economy shifts, that we get inflation down, debt down, borrowing down.
Which would be very little to do with the government, frankly.
Well, indeed. And they do have this little bit of fiscal headroom, this £13 billion, which in the scheme of things sounds like a lot, but isn't really. And what Jeremy Hunt does with that in the autumn statement later this month, which I think will be at least as significant as the King's Speech today.
I think it should be a clause in the speech, something like, but my government will get police commissioners to arrest criminals and investigate crimes.
Yeah. Radical idea.
That's a bit, that'll never take off, will it?
Never take off.
Sadly, many of them won't know how to do that.
Because they've never done it.
Well, that was a very positive and uplifting interview. Thank you, Peters, both.
Thank you, the two Peters.